There are moments in life when you stop running, not because you are out of breath, but because something inside you finally says this is the place where the hiding ends. And in that pause, in that inward stillness, where the world can no longer pull you away from yourself, you discover a quiet question rising. What if nothing was actually wrong with me? What if the shame I carry is not identity, but residue, something that once formed around fear and stayed only because I never turned to face it? This video begins there, on that fragile threshold where the mind softens enough to wonder whether pain is not an enemy, but a messenger carrying news from a forgotten kingdom within. A kingdom that has waited through the noise and the striving, through the years of pretending and posturing, through the layers of masks built to protect a self that never needed protection. Beneath all that effort lies a voice that has been whispering since the beginning. You are more than the storm you survived. When people speak of healing, they often imagine a triumph of effort, a heroic climb toward better habits, stronger discipline, new philosophies. But inside the architecture of genuine inner transformation, something radically different happens. Healing is not achievement, it is recognition. It is the mind remembering what it tried so hard to forget. It is the return to a truth that stood patient while we wandered through illusions of guilt and inadequacy. Shame does something strange to a human being. It bends the spine of the soul. It persuades you that you are unworthy of your own innocence. It teaches you to shrink from the very light that could have revealed your wholeness. And yet, for all its weight, shame has no roots. It cannot anchor itself in the mind unless you nourish it with belief. It survives only by inheritance, an emotional echo passed down, repeated, rehearsed, mistaken for identity. But there comes a day when the echo fades. There comes a moment when the interior landscape alters, and the mind is willing to see differently, not with the eyes of the wounded self, but with the vision of something older, clearer, infinitely more compassionate. And in that shift, the entire story of pain begins to unfold in a new direction. So let us begin, not with fear, but with honesty. The kind of honesty that does not punish, but liberates. The kind that allows you to sit with yourself without judgment, without rehearsing your failures, without rehearsing the narrative of unworthiness that has been repeated so long it almost feels sacred. This is the moment where sacredness returns to its rightful place, not as punishment, but as presence. There is a voice within you. Call it intuition, call it guidance, call it the ancient intelligence that lives beneath all the noise. It does not shout, it does not threaten. It does not bargain with your insecurity. It speaks in a language too soft to hear when you are running away from yourself. But when you become still, when you breathe as though you are being breathed, when you stop trying to fix yourself and instead dare to see yourself, that voice steps forward. It reveals something astonishing. Shame has never been yours. Pain has never been the truth of you. They are interpretations, not identity. They are contractions of a mind frightened by its own vastness. What you are is the space that witnesses both the contraction and the release. What you are cannot be harmed by a story you inherited. Consider this. Every time you felt overwhelmed, every time you collapsed inward, every time you thought you were too flawed to be loved, something deep inside you remained untouched. Something watched your suffering the way the sky watches a storm, without fear that the clouds could stain it. And perhaps this is where healing truly begins. Not in fighting the storm, not in demanding that the clouds disappear, but in realizing that the sky has always been you. Humans often believe that pain is a sign of failure. They think that if they just learned faster, forgave quicker, trusted more, loved better, pain would stop happening. But pain is an indicator, not a punishment. It points to the places where the mind separated itself from its own essence. And that essence, that core of quiet luminosity, is what keeps trying to call you back. The journey inward is not about repairing a broken self. It's about recovering the self that was never broken. And to do that, you must learn a new kind of listening, the listening that happens when the ego finally stops performing. There's a moment in everyone's life when the old voice grows tired. The voice that says you are not enough. The voice that says you must earn love. The voice that says you must hide your flaws beneath a persona polished enough to pass inspection. That voice eventually collapses under its own weight. And in the silence that follows, a deeper voice rises. It says you are already whole. It says nothing real can be lost. It says the love you seek has been flowing through you since the beginning, untouched by every mistake, every regret, every lonely night spent believing you were unworthy of kindness. When you listen to that voice, something extraordinary happens. Shame begins to evaporate like morning mist. Pain begins to reorganize itself into understanding. Memories that once haunted you soften into lessons, and your identity, once built from fear, dissolves into something far more spacious. This is the turning, the place where inner gravity shifts and the mind stops orbiting around fear, the place where you finally understand that the light you've been begging for was always coming from within. And as we move deeper into this journey, as we walk through the hallways of memory and emotion, keep this truth with you like a lantern. Nothing you discover inside yourself is too much for the truth of what you are. Nothing you feel is a threat to your essence. Nothing you have been through has the power to define the infinite. The next step is understanding how to return to that voice. Not occasionally, not by accident, but intentionally. Because the moment you choose to listen, the shame that once shaped your life begins to lose its power. There is a strange tenderness in the act of returning to yourself. Not the self made of history and habits, but the self that existed before you believed anything about who you were allowed to be. When you approach this inner sanctuary, something sacred begins to shift. The mind, once armored by years of self-protection, starts to loosen its grip. Thoughts slow down. The atmosphere within you becomes spacious, almost like entering a cathedral built out of silence. This silence is not empty. It is alive. It contains the memory of everything you have forgotten about your own holiness. And when you stand in that space long enough, you begin to feel the truth that shame once tried to bury. You were never meant to live as a shadow of yourself. You were created as an extension of something luminous, and the remnants of that luminosity still glow beneath every wound. The voice of shame does not understand this light. It fears it, because light dissolves everything that pretends to be true. Shame thrives in darkness, unexamined corners, buried emotions, narratives you inherited without consent. But the moment you let awareness touch those places, shame begins to melt. Not because you fight it, but because you outgrow it. Imagine for a moment holding all your past pain in your hands. Imagine seeing it not as failure, but as a map, showing the places where you believed you were separate from love. This map is not a condemnation, it is guidance. It shows where tenderness must return. It shows where the mind forgot its own radiance. It shows where forgiveness must be extended, not outward first, but inward. People often misunderstand forgiveness. They think it is a moral achievement, a kind of spiritual reward for being good. But real forgiveness is not a performance. Real forgiveness is clarity. It is the moment you realize that your suffering came not from what happened, but from the meaning the mind attached to it. Forgiveness is the unraveling of false meaning. It is the mind saying, I am ready to see this differently. And when that willingness appears, even in the smallest measure, the entire inner world begins to reorganize itself around honesty. Not brutal, self-punishing honesty, but compassionate honesty. The kind that looks softly at every wound and says, you don't have to hide anymore. As you move deeper into this process, you begin to notice something remarkable. The pain you thought would destroy you actually becomes a doorway. Not a doorway to more suffering, but a doorway to a dimension of self-awareness that was inaccessible before. Through that doorway flows a new kind of perception, a perception rooted not in fear, but in remembrance. Remembrance that you are not the sum of your mistakes. Remembrance that you are not the story others told about you. Remembrance that your essence predates every wound. And with that remembrance comes a revelation. The part of you capable of witnessing your suffering without collapsing into it is the real you. The part that can observe the storm is never the storm itself. This is why inner work transforms everything. Because once you know you are the sky, you stop identifying with the rain. There is a moment, sometimes sudden, sometimes gradual, when you feel this truth land in you like a quiet dawn. A moment when you stop trying to impress the world and start trying to tell the truth to yourself. A moment when you realize that strength is not the absence of vulnerability, but the willingness to meet vulnerability without running. And when you reach that point, something extraordinary opens within you. The heart begins to breathe again, not just physically, but spiritually. It expands, it softens, it releases its grip on old narratives. You feel a kind of emotional exhale, as though the soul has been waiting years for you to finally unclench. This is the learning the world never taught you, that gentleness is not weakness, that allowing yourself to feel is not failure, that being human is not a flaw in your design. Every emotion you have ever felt, even the ones you feared, even the ones you judged, was simply a signal pointing back toward the truth of your being. But now that you are willing to listen, the entire inner landscape changes. You no longer approach healing like a battle to be won. You approach it like a homecoming, a return, a remembering. In this remembering, shame loses its authority. Pain loses its narrative power. You begin to sense that something within you is guiding the entire process, an intelligence that predates your suffering and will outlast it by eternity. Call it awareness, call it spirit, call it the quiet presence that watches over your life with eyes that never condemn. This presence has been with you in every moment you thought you were alone. It has been whispering through your intuition, through your longing for freedom, through the subtle feeling that you were meant for something more honest, more spacious, more alive. And now as you listen, you realize that healing is not something you manufacture. It is something you allow. It is not something you push. It is something you surrender to. Because the truth is this: what you are returning to has been waiting for you since the beginning. It has never been angry with you. It has never doubted you. It has never believed the stories you told about yourself. It only waits, endlessly patient, for the moment when you choose to pause long enough to feel its presence. And that is the moment when everything begins to change. Not slowly, not painfully, but naturally. The way ice transforms into water, the way darkness dissolves in the presence of dawn. You do not have to force healing. You only have to stop resisting the light already within you. This realization marks the true beginning. Not the beginning of effort, but the beginning of openness. You are not fixing yourself. You are uncovering yourself. You are not reaching upward. You are returning inward. And as this return deepens, your relationship with pain transforms. Pain becomes a teacher instead of a tyrant. It becomes a signal rather than a sentence. You begin to ask new questions, not why am I like this, but what is this emotion trying to show me about where I left myself behind? This is where the journey carries us next, into the heart of old memories, old beliefs, old emotional patterns that once felt threatening but now reveal themselves as places where love needs to be reintroduced, places where the mind needs to be invited to see differently, places where you can finally rest. There comes a moment in inner work when the mind realizes it cannot return to its old architecture. Something has shifted too deeply, too permanently. The scaffolding that once held up the identity built from fear begins to loosen, piece by piece, as if an old structure finally understands it is no longer needed. This is not collapse, it is release. It is the psyche surrendering the burden of holding together a self that was never true. When you begin to listen to the deeper voice within you, the world outside does not vanish, but it loses its authority. The opinions of others start to sound like distant echoes instead of commands. The expectations you once felt obligated to meet dissolve into background noise. And then the strangest thing happens. Your nervous system, once tied in knots around survival strategies, begins to unwind. You realize that you are not here to perform your worthiness. You are here to remember it. This remembrance is not a single revelation. It happens in layers, like fog lifting from a landscape that was always there. One day you wake up, and a piece of guilt you've carried your entire life suddenly feels thinner. Another day, a memory that used to sting now feels strangely neutral. And sometimes, without warning, the heart opens like a window catching sunlight, and you understand, without words, that you are held by something immeasurable. But the ego does not surrender easily. It tries to reclaim you by whispering familiar fears. It tells you that you must protect yourself, that you must remain on guard, that love is conditional and belonging must be earned. It tries to convince you that the softening you feel is dangerous, that if you let go of your defenses, you will be exposed, vulnerable, unprotected. The irony is that the ego's version of protection is what makes you feel unsafe in the first place. You are not fragile because you feel deeply. You are fragile when you identify with the voice that insists you must hide your depth. Shame thrives in secrecy. Pain multiplies when avoided. But when you hold your wounds up to the light of awareness, not to judge them, but to see them, they lose their power to control you. Awareness is the solvent that dissolves the chains you never realized you were carrying. To listen to the deeper voice requires trust, but not the kind of trust the world teaches. This is not trust based on guarantees, not a contract with the future, not a negotiation with outcomes. It is the trust of surrender, the trust that arises when you recognize that something wiser than your fear has been guiding you all along. Think of how many decisions you made while afraid. Think of how many times anxiety shaped your path. Think of how often you shrank your own potential to avoid judgment, conflict, or loss. And yet, despite all those detours, something inside you kept calling you forward. Something refused to let you disappear into the smallness of your own expectations. Something kept reminding you, through intuition, through synchronicities, through unexpected moments of clarity, that you are more than the story you inherited. Every person who walks this earth carries a moment when they realize they can no longer live in contradiction with their own soul. A moment when the pain of suppression becomes greater than the fear of awakening. When that moment arrives, something ancient stirs, a remembrance of your original wholeness, untouched by the world's interpretations. This is where the real journey begins. Not the journey of fixing, but the journey of unveiling. Not the journey of becoming, but the journey of remembering. You don't become whole. You notice that you always were. And yet, the mind will ask, if I am already whole, why do I feel broken? Because healing is not the restoration of wholeness, it is the restoration of awareness. Pain is the signal that you've forgotten your true nature. Shame is the veil that convinces you to look away from yourself. And both lose their meaning the moment you turn toward them, with compassion instead of resistance. Compassion is not indulgence. It is not self-pity. It is not excuse-making. Compassion is the willingness to witness your suffering without identifying with it. It is the recognition that the one who feels pain is not the pain. The one who feels fear is not the fear. The one who feels shame is not the shame. Compassion is the first step toward spiritual clarity. It is also the point where the inner teacher, the quiet voice, the deeper intuition becomes unmistakable. You begin to recognize its tone, its guidance, its presence, not as an external command, but as the natural rhythm of your own being. And as this connection strengthens, you begin to understand something profound. There has always been a part of you that cannot be wounded, cannot be diminished, cannot be corrupted by anything you've lived through. This part of you has been watching from the beginning, waiting for the moment when you were ready to remember. And when you finally listen, when you finally let the truth beneath the noise rise to the surface, the healing you once thought would take years begins to unfold in a way that feels both effortless and inevitable. This is the liberation of the mind, not the absence of pain, but the end of identification with it. Not the erasure of the past, but the reinterpretation of it. Not the fixing of a self, but the awakening of one. And as this awakening continues, you begin to feel a shift inside, a new gravity, a new center of awareness. It pulls you gently toward clarity, toward peace, toward an internal spaciousness where shame cannot survive. This is the threshold of part 4, where the journey turns from recognition to embodiment, from understanding to lived experience, from hearing the inner voice to trusting it in every moment. There is a point in every inward journey where the mind hesitates, not because the path is unclear, but because the truth ahead feels too vast to enter without trembling. It is the moment when old identities dissolve like sandcastles at the edge of the tide. And even though this dissolution brings liberation, it can feel like standing at the edge of a cliff, watching the wind reshape the world. But this too is grace. The self you thought you were, the self assembled from childhood patterns, inherited fears, unchallenged beliefs, cannot cross this threshold. It is too small, too defended, too invested in survival. What crosses is the self beneath all stories, the self that remembers its origin not in pain, but in light. When that self rises, the world does not end. It simply becomes honest. There is an innocence within you that has waited since the beginning of your life for this moment of recognition. It has watched you wander through illusions, not with disappointment, but with patience. It knew that each misstep would guide you back to clarity, that every collapse would invite you to rise as something more spacious, more tender, more aligned. But innocence does not return with noise. It returns with simplicity. A simplicity so profound that the ego cannot mimic it. It sounds like this: I choose peace now. Peace is not an escape. It is not the bypassing of pain or the refusal to look at shadow. Peace is the recognition that everything you fear is an interpretation, not a destiny. It is the understanding that nothing real can be harmed, and nothing unreal has any power. Peace is what remains when you stop entertaining the voice that insists you are small. There is a humility required to enter peace, a humility that comes not from weakness but from clarity. True humility is not self-degradation. It is the willingness to stop arguing with reality. It is the willingness to stop insisting that you must fix yourself before you are allowed to be loved. It is the willingness to step into a truth that has been calling you since the beginning. You are as love created you. The mind often resists this truth because it fears its own magnitude. Magnitude feels dangerous to the ego because magnitude cannot be controlled. Magnitude cannot be contained within narratives of guilt. Magnitude does not negotiate. It simply shines. But shining is what you were made for, not as performance, not as spiritual achievement, but as natural expression. When a star burns, it does not try to impress the darkness. It simply is what it is. And the light fills the sky, not because it seeks attention, but because it cannot help but illuminate everything around it. That is what awakening feels like. Not an explosion, but an unveiling. The unveiling of a self that has never been wounded, never been stained by shame, never been shaped by the world's illusions. This self is not earned, it is remembered. As you approach the final stage of this inner movement, something unexpected happens. Forgiveness becomes effortless, not because you force it, but because you see there is nothing to forgive. Every person who hurt you acted from their own unhealed mind. Every moment that broke you was a misunderstanding of your own worth. Every judgment you placed upon yourself was based on a story that never belonged to you. Forgiveness is not a gift you give to others. It is the door you open so you can walk out of your own captivity. Once the door opens, everything changes. your perception changes. Your emotional gravity shifts. The world that once pressed against your chest now rests gently in your hands. And you realize that the strength you sought was never about holding yourself together, but about letting yourself be who you already are. This is the quiet revolution of the spirit. No one else may know it is happening within you. No fireworks may erupt across the sky. No one may applaud. And yet, the universe itself rearranges around your shift in awareness. Because when a mind becomes willing to heal, it alters the direction of creation. It returns to the rhythm of its source. You begin to feel the holy presence, not as something distant or mystical, but as the natural state beneath all confusion. The presence does not instruct with commands. It does not argue. It does not threaten. It simply reminds you of what was forgotten. Its guidance arrives as a subtle alignment, a feeling of yes in the chest, a soft clarity that dissolves resistance without force. The more you listen, the more your life reorganizes, not through effort, but through resonance. People who once triggered your fear become mirrors, showing you your progress. Situations that once overwhelmed you lose their intensity. Even your own thoughts become gentler, quieter, more spacious. And then, almost without noticing, a new way of being emerges. You stop seeking love because you finally recognize you are the expression of it. You stop fearing loss because you understand nothing essential can be taken. You stop defending yourself because there is nothing left to defend. This is not the end of your journey. It is the beginning of a life lived in coherence with your true nature. A life where you choose peace not as an escape, but as your foundation. A life where every moment becomes an invitation to remember who walks with you. If you ever doubt this truth, if the old voice returns with its familiar story of inadequacy, if the weight of the world presses against your spirit, come back to this. Shame is not identity. Pain is not destiny. Fear is not truth. You are the one who witnesses the storm, not the one consumed by it. And the light you seek is the light you are. Live from that light. Breathe from that light. Extend that light to everyone you meet. Because when you do, the remnants of shame fall away, the echoes of pain dissolve, and what remains is the unshakable presence of the self that remembers its origin in love. This is your return. This is your remembering. This is the end of forgetting and the beginning of true vision. And from here, everything becomes possible.